Welcome to another edition of CapitolView, your weekly look at the happenings inside and outside the Illinois State Capitol. I'm Jennifer Fuller. Our guests this week are Jason Pisha, the director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield, and Jeremy Gorner of the Chicago Tribune. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Good to be here.
We'll start with something that I just want to take a little bit of time on this week. We've spent quite a bit of time over the last several weeks, and that's Illinois' assault weapons ban. As most people are aware, the lawsuits against the assault weapons ban are continuing to make their way through state and federal courts. In some cases, those cases are being consolidated into one case, and that's just to improve efficiency so that the same argument isn't being made in numerous cases. But Jason, can you get us up to speed? This is a long-term argument. This isn't something that'll be solved over the next couple of weeks.
Definitely. The news about it this week was that an appellate court ruled, earlier there was a ruling in Effingham County that put a temporary restraining order on enforcing the assault weapons ban. It was appealed immediately. The appellate court took a look at it and indicated that, yes, there is a plausible argument to be made that the law does not provide equal protection. There's some portions of the law that indicate who is still allowed to have these weapons, including retired and active law enforcement, active military. But for example, retired military are not allowed to have these weapons under the law. So the argument is that that's not fair, and there needs to be some better clarification within the law that makes it fair for everyone. The appellate court did throw out some other technical objections to that the plaintiffs brought up, including how the law was passed in the General Assembly during that session, sort of ramming it through at the last minute, which always gets people excited. But they said that's okay. So we're just basically waiting now for the next decision, which really gets down to what's for equal protection of the law, and then on a larger scale, from a federal standpoint, does this violate the Second Amendment? So we'll see.
And those things, of course, the federal case will likely take quite a bit longer than the state case. We'll likely see that state case, if it makes it to the Supreme Court, which we expect it will be elevated to that level, that will happen before the federal decisions are handed down. Now, it wouldn't be Illinois if there wasn't a story within a story. And we saw this week that there is some infighting between two of the different cases, or perhaps plaintiffs in those cases. Attorney Tom DeVore, who people are well familiar with, he was the attorney who filed a lot of the cases against Governor Pritzker regarding his COVID restrictions. He was also the GOP nominee for Illinois Attorney General last year, is having a bit of a spat with another plaintiff in one of the cases against the assault weapons ban. That's State Representative Dan Calkins of Decatur, a Republican out of Decatur. And Jeremy, this is a little bit complicated, a little bit inside baseball, but they're arguing over money that was donated to fund these lawsuits. Am I right?
That's correct. And obviously, to Jason's point too about Effingham County, Tom DeVore was the attorney who represented the plaintiffs in those cases, in that case that allowed for the temporary restraining order to go forward. So you have him on one side, you have Dan Calkins on another side, who has been, reportedly using campaign funds from his legal defense fund to pay for his lawsuit in Macon County, where he's having clients basically donate to the legal defense fund so that he could fight a similar case that DeVore is fighting in other counties like Effingham County and White County. DeVore has obviously cried foul over this. Calkins has basically come out and basically said that, look, there's nothing wrong with me doing this, because I'm not using this money for personal gain. This is, money that's being used to influence policy, which is no different than what DeVore is doing with his lawsuits, obviously. But at the same time, you have the State Board of Elections. The whole idea of the story is Calkins using campaign funds improperly? And Matt Dietrich from the State Board of Elections has come out and said that it's kind of a gray area. There's nothing that explicitly prohibits it, but it's obviously something that could be reviewed by the Board of Elections if somebody were to file a complaint. So nobody's come out and said that what he's doing is illegal or anything like that, but it's obviously something that has look, DeVore's been kind of the only name in the game when it comes to filing these lawsuits for temporary restraining orders. Until now, evidently. And, obviously DeVore, and of course, I think the other question to ask is, why would Tom DeVore care? He and Calkins are on the same side of this issue. And the only thing that I could just ascertain just from covering Tom a little bit is that, he's somebody who tries to keep politics, at least what he has said, he's tried to keep politics out of any actions that he takes, against Governor Pritzker or against, Democratic policies, so to speak. So, that could have something. He might be looking at what Calkins is doing through a political campaign fund as an affront to that. But whether Calkins is actually doing anything improper, there's really nothing that the State Board of Elections has come out and said that it's explicitly wrong. So there's that as well. So like I said, there's that as well.
Sure. Now, Jason, if the State Board of Elections were to come out and say you can't use the money in this way, does that impact Representative Calkins' election for 2 years from now? Are we looking at something that may be an issue in his lawsuit?
Yeah, definitely. If the State Board of Elections indicates that there is some impropriety or that isn't a proper use of campaign funds, presumably he'd have to give all that money back to the donors. Although he's already said he's willing to do that if people felt like they were being duped and giving him $200 to put into his campaign account. But if there's any sanctions from the elections board on what he can do with his election funding, that could affect what was already in his account as well, and what he can do to try to get reelected in 2 years.
Sure. As a sidebar, there are also lawsuits against legislation that we talked a lot about at the turn of the year, and that was the Safety Act, which a lot of law enforcement agencies and others were saying, this is not going to be good for us. Jeremy, bring us up to speed. I know that the Illinois Attorney General has made his argument for the law with the state Supreme Court. Where does that lawsuit stand?
So right now, each side is so obviously with Kankakee County, with the Kankakee County judge siding with more than 60 state's attorneys in a lawsuit that in ruling that, the Safety Act, particularly the no cash bail provision, was unconstitutional. The case is now with the state Supreme Court after Attorney General Kwame Raoul appealed Kankakee County's decision. And Raoul last week released his arguments in the appeal to the state Supreme Court. His big argument is basically that nothing in the state constitution prevents a defendant from being released before trial without paying money as a form of bail. I think a big point of contention in the Kankakee County case, for the judge over there was this question about, because bailable offenses are, specifically referred to in the state constitution. The question is, are bailable offenses referring to monetary bail? And Raoul's office is arguing that it does not refer to monetary bail. And that kind of goes to the heart of the pretrial provisions where, with the elimination of cash bail. So he released arguments basically saying that that there is nothing, when you abolish cash bail, there's nothing prohibiting the state from doing that. It's not going against the Constitution. So that's really kind of the main crux of the argument as well. And also another argument too that Raoul has brought up is that, the plaintiffs in the Kankakee County case, the state's attorneys, had to prove that their rights were somehow violated if these pretrial provisions were to go into effect. And the argument that Raoul is making is that the the rights of the plaintiffs are not at issue here. It's the rights of criminal defendants that are at issue here, and they were not plaintiffs in this lawsuit. So that's, another argument that Raul's office has brought up against the state's attorneys for why they don't believe the Kankakee County judge's ruling has any merit. So we'll see if that flies, obviously. The Kankakee County side has until February 17th to file their counter argument against Raul. And then in March, that's when both sides will do oral arguments before the High Court.
Yet another issue that we'll certainly keep track of. You mentioned February 17th. February 15th, Governor J.B. Pritzker will give his State of the State and budget address, his annual address to the Illinois General Assembly. And a lot of people are looking toward what he is going to say, and that can point back to some of the comments that he made in his inauguration address in January. But he also has talked about some things that have come about because of a surplus of funds in the state budget this fiscal year, the year that ends June 30th. Things like paying off the loans that were made in the unemployment trust fund, as well as some other issues that are being paid off and legislation that was able to be passed to add to the rainy day fund and things like that. Jason, what are you expecting from the State of the State and budget address? And do you think that there will be a look toward this potential of perhaps a recession or a downturn in the economy?
I think, the state's financial position is okay now, not as dire as we usually talk about on this show, thanks to all the, the resurgence of the economy after COVID. But I think, this is an opportunity for J.B. Pritzker to sort of set his stake in the ground on what he's going to do with this second term. We heard a little bit about it during his inauguration address. He mentioned, he'd like to make preschool free to everyone. He's also talking about free college for working class families. We haven't heard many details on how he's going to pay for that or where the money's going to come from, because that's a lot of money that those programs will cost. He's also talked about, improving access to childcare for families as well. So, get rid of the childcare desert, so to speak, that are occurring around the state. So there's those fiscal issues that'll come up. Less of a fiscal issue, but I think social issue as well will be the abortion issue. We're sort of waiting to see what the legislature or the administration is going to do to sort of further enshrine and protect a woman's right to choose in Illinois from after Roe was overturned, with all the states making their decisions to cut back on what women can do with their bodies. So it'll be interesting to see what direction he takes it.
Jeremy, a lot of people are looking towards a speech like the State of the State or the budget, where the governor lays out these broad terms and goals that he'd like to achieve and saying, well, there's a supermajority in both the House and the Senate. These things should be a slam dunk. But Republicans are working in ways to slow things down and say, wait, we want a seat at the table. How do you think those negotiations will go this year?
Well, already Republicans have gone on the offensive over an idea being floated around by one of the Senate Democrats that they wanted to bring back a progressive income tax. Of course, that was a measure that was failed in 2019 through a vote, from the public. And even before this is just one example. Such an idea has not even been filed yet. A bunch of Senate Republicans, I believe it was 12 of them last week, went on the offensive and already talked about why this was a bad idea. So that's one example. And as far as others, Republicans have repeatedly beat the drum that the big reason that Illinois is in such great shape financially is because of the ARPA funds. Well, that money's going to run out. What are you going to do then? So there's a lot of cynicism among the super minority when it comes to all that. So those are just two things that we've seen so far. And I guess to Jason's point too, what I'd like to say is, I did ask the governor last week about his plan for free college tuition. And this was at a press conference in Chicago where he was talking about expanding a a trade school program by $13 million at one of the local colleges in Chicago, and asked about free college tuition. He basically said, this is something I've been talking about for years. We've issued MAP grants and given out money for this for working class families, but he obviously dodged specifics about what his plan is. So I guess we'll see come budget address. But as far as back to your point, Jen, about what Republicans, how they feel about this. Like I said, they've beat the drum about what are you going to do when this federal money runs out, and and how sustainable will any Democratic plan be? So that'll obviously be something that we'll learn more about in the coming weeks. Not just even beyond the budget address, just as things take shape through the General Assembly. I mean, there have been a bunch of proposals already for tax breaks on both sides of the aisle already, or tax credits rather. So we'll see if any of that shakes out.
Yeah, certainly keep an eye on that. Again, the budget address is coming up on February 15th. Now, Governor Pritzker also announced this week that along with the federal COVID mandates and emergency declarations that will expire in May, the Illinois emergency declarations will also expire at the same time. Jason, obviously that means that some of the rules will go back. You won't see the governor issuing a lot of those emergency declarations, but it also means that SNAP benefits and some of the other benefits to lower working class and lower class economic class people may have some extra help that they're going to need as they see this transition.
With these emergency declarations, I know, the governor's opponents really got bent out of shape as they went on month after month after month. They've gone on for, 3 years now. And, some of his opponents thought, we need to stop calling this an emergency. They thought that after about a year or so. But they continued on. And like I said, like you mentioned, they do allow certain financial benefits that will officially run out. Those will run out on the federal level as well. With certain benefits like all the free vaccines we're getting without having to pay anything out of pocket. All that's going to go away. You may face an out-of-pocket copay now when you get a booster. Same thing for free COVID tests. You can go online and have COVID tests mailed to your house. That will end as well. I find those useful to have around every time my kid has a sniffle or a cough and you wonder if it's COVID or not. It's good to have the test in your cabinet ready to give them. But yeah, and then, on the state level, we're, Medicaid recipients, food stamp recipients will start to get less. So it'll be interesting to see how, I'm sure people in those situations aren't completely 100% recovered or 100% ready to face the financial burden that will happen because of this. So it'll be interesting to see if the state does anything in, sort of a buffer period here to help them out as we sort of wind down from all this.
Certainly keeping an eye on the fact that deadline for those things to expire will be around the same time that the legislature has its own deadline to get legislation out of the General Assembly and onto Governor Pritzker's desk. So certainly those will be things that we keep an eye on as well. A new administration, or a renewing of an administration in this case, when a governor wins re-election, means that we start to see department heads change places. And that's no different this year. Governor Pritzker's second term is no different. We saw earlier this week the announcement of a new state school superintendent. And Jason, I wanted to stick with you here on this. A new leader for the Department of Education. Carmen Ayala is stepping aside as her term has come to an end, and a new state school superintendent in Tony Sanders out of the Elgin area. How important is that leadership role for the State Board of Education and for Governor Pritzker's administration?
Yeah, the State Board of Education sort of sets statewide policy on education. We think a lot about local control of school districts being held there so they can make their own decisions. But when it comes to things like standardized testing and teacher training and addressing the teacher shortage, a lot of those policy priorities come from the top, from the State Board of Education. So Tony Sanders comes into this. He Elgin's the second largest school district in the state. So he's used to dealing with, large groups of government people to lead. And I think, one of the main issues that, he's going to have to deal with is sort of this unresolved issue of what to do about standardized testing in Illinois. There's been discussion over the last several years on the usefulness of the IAR, the Illinois Assessment of Readiness test that all students are given. A lot of opponents say, they take too long to take, takes up too much class time to prepare students to take them. And then, even more annoying is the fact that the results of those tests often come too late, to the fact that, if they do notice anything wrong with a student's performance, the student's already on to the next grade by the time they know that. There's been some efforts over the past couple of years to try to fix that, and they've sort of put it off. So, they're sort of under the gun here to try to get a test in place that works for everyone. So that's going to be a challenge as well. And then another issue, I don't think anyone has talked about it much yet, but I had a lobbyist for the Illinois Education Association talk to my journalism class this week just about things going on in this session. And one thing he brought up was the fact that the Invest in Kids Act, I don't know if you remember that was, it's the law signed by the Rauner administration that allows people to make donations to scholarship funds for private schools and then get a pretty large tax break for that donation. People who like this law like it because if you're a low-income student and you're not pleased with your public school, you can, try out a private school and get some help paying for that. The opponents say, we're just diverting money away from the public school system, which really needs it. That law is set to expire this year. So the lobbyist was telling me, one of the, main fights this year will be, convincing the legislature to actually let the expiration date happen and not to extend it again. So we'll see where that goes as well.
Sure. One of the appointments that is actually a reappointment this year may cause some eyebrows to raise just a little bit. And Jeremy, I know you've done some reporting on this. Mark Smith has been the head of the Department of Children and Family Services through quite a bit of turmoil over the last several years. He's been reappointed for another term, and a new lawsuit was filed in those cases where juvenile wards of the state were left in jail or in a prison situation when they needed to be moved out to a foster situation. Bring us up to speed there.
Yeah, the term is release upon request. So basically, if a judge allows a youth to be released from a county juvenile detention center facility, they would have to stay in that facility if there is no parent or guardian available for them to stay with. And obviously, the Cook County Public Guardian, Charles Goldberg, and a noted civil rights law firm in Chicago, Loewy & Loewy, filed a lawsuit alleging that, these children's rights are being violated because of they're being wrongly incarcerated in the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center. And of course, they were really only speaking for Cook County. The scope of of how prevalent this is statewide, that was addressed less than really what was going on in Cook County. But still, this is, the latest federal action taken against DCFS, which has been under a federal consent decree for about 30 years already. So, but in terms of, Pritzker's reappointment of Mark Smith, he's defended him throughout all the criticism that Pritzker's administration has taken throughout his reelection effort and throughout his campaign. Basically, Smith is like the 14th or 15th different leader of DCFS since 2003. I mean, there's just been such massive turnover for that agency. And, to actually pin the blame on these attorneys are, of course, pinning the blame on Pritzker for not providing enough beds, enough residential space for these children who are wrongly incarcerated. This is really just a continuation of the problems that have been plaguing the agency since the 1990s. This has basically encompassed Democratic administrations, Republican administrations. This is really no different. So yes, and amid all this, Smith was reinstated as the DCFS director. So we'll see how this lawsuit though shakes out. Especially because like the legal question that I had, and I was talking to the ACLU about this because they're pretty active with the federal consent decree, is that some of these issues are already supposed to be addressed in that consent decree. So, we'll see how much traction this lawsuit gets. But, one thing that can't be denied, this is probably the biggest, probably the most significant legal effort, at least in the last 2-3 years, taken against DCFS. But, again, with Smith's reappointment, I mean, it just kind of signals that, obviously Pritzker has a lot of faith in people who have gotten him this far in his governorship. But this is also a problem that, again, goes way beyond his administration. It was, again, this has plagued Republican administrations before Pritzker as well, going back 3 years.
Sure. The questions are going to continue, and we'll continue to seek answers for those here on Capitol View. I'd like to thank Jeremy Gorner and Jason Pisha for joining us this week. I'm Jennifer Fuller. You can find all of our episodes online at WSIU.org and at our YouTube page. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.